Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Theology Thursday, where Dave and I answer some of your curly questions. One of them coming up in a few weeks is what's with the 153 fish at the end of the gospel. So we'll answer that later. But right now, I've got a question, and it's burning on anybody's lips. Are we in the end times? I mean, COVID-19, is it a sign that this is it? Is this the horrible day of the Lord? You know, a lot of people are saying that. A lot of people are saying, oh, we could be in the end times.
Well, so, I know somebody that said we were in the end times.
Who's that?
John.
John, your friend John?
No, the Apostle John. And he's writing here in 1 John 2, he says, little children, these are the last days. 1 John 2:18.
There it is.
So John thought he was living in the last days. And in fact, I think ever since then, people have said the same. And they're all right.
He goes on in that very verse 18, to say, yes, you've heard that Antichrist is coming, and many Antichrists have come. This is how we know we're in the last days.
Yep.
So we've been in the last days since John wrote this.
Absolutely.
When did John write that?
About 85 AD.
About 85 AD. Do you know, if you think about it, the end of the Old Testament, the end of the old system, like that's what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 25. The end will come. He wasn't talking about the end of the world. He was talking 24. About what? Well, you tell me. What was he talking about?
Okay, the end of the age is quite different to the end of the world.
Yes, it is.
There's been a number of ages that have been, and there was one age that came to an end just as Jesus prophesied. And that was the age where sacrifice was made in the temple. And it came to an end just as Jesus said and when he said.
So was that when Jesus was crucified? Because we know that he became the propitiation, the substitute for us. He became the Lamb of God.
Spiritually, yes. But physically...
Yeah, because... Physically, they kept
going.
They kept going. Like, even as that was happening, the lambs were being slaughtered on Good Friday.
Correct.
Lambs were being slaughtered down in the temple, and they kept being slaughtered year after year. When did that finish?
Jesus kept saying to the disciples when they asked the question, he kept saying, this generation will see. And he was right. That generation saw all of those things that Jesus prophesied there in Matthew 24. The age ended. The age of sacrifice was done and dusted.
Absolutely. So he was saying that, and when you see all these signs, and he actually started listing those signs in the book of Matthew, that you know there will be, you know, a great and horrible time, that you know there'll be plagues and war and the blood and you know all of it was pretty bad. And he said even you know if these times were not cut short for the sake of the elect, you know, like it would be devastating.
And it's really interesting that Josephus, who was a historian, he wrote concerning the sacking of Jerusalem and the siege of Jerusalem, and he used those exact terms. It was as though he was quoting Jesus. He said that unless the days had been shortened, then the very elect, being the Jews, would not have survived. And the days were shortened because the prince, which was the prince which is to come, the prince of Rome, had an order that came in and said, go now. And so that's when he went in and destroyed Jerusalem.
And that happened in the year 70 AD. So really, the age of the first covenant, the age of the Mosaic covenant with the law of God, actually ended not when Jesus was crucified. Spiritually it did, but it physically ended in the year 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed and they could no longer sacrifice.
That's correct.
Because you can't sacrifice down at the synagogue, just in case you were wondering. You can't sacrifice anywhere but that one place. It has to be the temple in Jerusalem. And so still today, some people are looking forward to the re-establishment of the temple so that they can start that up again, thinking that would be a sign of the imminent coming of the Lord. But what you're saying is that the end times actually started then.
The end times have been going since the
destruction
of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
And
Wow.
People say, well, what about Jesus said that the stars would fall from the sky, the moon would, and so forth. When we look in Scripture, we find that that is a common reference to kingdoms. And the king's falling, it means the star has fallen. And of course, Rome, Caesar fell during that period. There were wars and rumours of war. There were civil wars being fought. There were incredible earthquakes that happened. Everything that Jesus said actually happened in that generation.
Well, what about the elect? What about the Christians that were in Jerusalem at the time? Like, they were in grave danger, because I know everybody in Jerusalem, in fact, there was over 1.3 million people that were killed during that siege.
And it was a ghastly siege inside. As I said, Josephus was talking about fires being put out by blood. He was talking about cannibalism. All of these things happening within the walls of Jerusalem during that time of siege.
When Jesus said, terrible. "Surely there will never be a day like it." Actually, I researched this. Of all the genocides in history, the worst maniac would have been Mao Zedong, easily 75 million people, but he didn't do it overnight. He didn't do it in a short space of time, and mostly it was starvation of his own people. Then you get Hitler and Stalin, both around 12 million people, and that was caused by war over several years. And apart from those three, this one is next on the list. Like, you've got Rwanda, which was 1 million people were killed, the killing fields in Cambodia. You've got in Uganda, what's his name?
This is way up there.
This is worse than all of those.
And one of the things that's really fascinating to me is that Jesus warned the Christians, warned his followers.
Well, that was his prophecy, wasn't it?
And he told them,
in Matthew
when
24.
you start to see this and this and this, get out, head to the hills. Don't even bother coming down from the rooftop. If you're out in the field, go. Leave somebody behind you if you need to. You just get out. And Josephus said that not one Christian died in the siege of Jerusalem. I find that amazing. Particularly being written by a non-Christian historian.
He was Jewish, but he wasn't Christian. And he noted that they all got out in time, which is incredible. That they remembered the prophecy of Jesus back in Matthew 24, and they've run to the hills of Pella when they saw the Roman army coming, and they realized, this is it. These guys are coming. They're going to lay siege to our city. We need to get out, and they did. So what Jesus was referring to in Matthew 24 is not the end of the world.
And COVID-19, people are looking at that and saying, well, is this the beginning of the tribulation? Well, it's a little bit late to begin the tribulation, because it's been running ever since Stephen was stoned. I like to ask the question of people, and that is, would you say that the Christians in North Korea are not suffering tribulation? What about the Christians in China or the Middle East? Go back historically. What about those during the Inquisition? Did they not suffer incredible tribulation? Of course they did. And we, in our Western thinking, seem to think that the tribulation is only that which affects us now. Whereas, in fact, around the world at the moment, there are many Christians who are facing tribulation moment by moment.
So I've got a question on that, but before I ask it, I got to say I do completely agree with you that I actually wonder if narcissism isn't our default position as humans. Like, if something bad's happening to me, it must be, I'm the center of the universe, so it must be the end of the world, because my little world is being affected. But as you say, there has been a lot of suffering and martyrdom throughout the ages. But here's my question regarding the tribulation. Daniel says, there's this times and half a time, 3.5 years, and then there's a lot of that talk about 3.5 years, and then another 3.5 years, and the 7. And so people start saying, well, is Jesus going to return before that, in the middle of that, at the end of that? What is he referring to?
Let's stop, because in order to put those 7 years at the end of the age, we've got to take that statue that Daniel saw, we've got to break its leg. We've got to put a gap in there. If we count just sequentially.
Well, just hold on a minute. So this statue that Dave's referring to, in the book of Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar has a vision of a massive statue. It had a head of gold, it had a chest of silver, it had a midsection of bronze, it had legs of iron and feet of iron and clay. And Daniel actually says, look, he interprets it for you. He says the head of gold is King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians. The chest of silver, the Persians. They're going to come right now and they're going to destroy you. Sorry about that, Nebuchadnezzar. The next section, history fills in, and at the end of the book, we realize it's the Greeks coming. Alexander the Great, and then the legs of iron are the two spheres of the Roman kingdom. And then, as the Roman Empire split into all these sections, we understand it's the feet, and that this rock, it talks about a rock that is not cut out by human hands, hits the statue on the feet. And it's referring to Jesus, not cut out by human hands. He's the Son of God. So he hits the statue on the feet, and it blows all kingdoms away and establishes his own kingdom. And Jesus is the one that said, my kingdom is not of this world. Prophet Isaiah says, of the increase of his government, there will be no end. Daniel talks about this rock, and he says that rock that hit the statue, blew it away, that will become a mountain that fills the whole world.
And that's the church.
And that's the church. That's his kingdom.
And now, if we look at that statue, we can actually count the years. And everybody is in agreement with that. Theologians generally
that's right.
agree.
No one's disagreeing.
So up to week 69, there's absolute agreement. And we know that week 69 finished at around about the time of Christ's baptism, beginning of his ministry.
Yeah.
Now, it says then this 70th week. In the midst of the week, that's 3.5 years, Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like Messiah being hung on a cross, not for himself, but for us? And then you've got the second 3.5 years, and I find this really fascinating too, that Jesus said to his disciples, go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. But where did they go? Where did they go? They did not go into all the world. For the next 3 and a bit years, they focused only on the Jews.
Yeah.
It took quite a while until the end of the time of the Gentiles came, at the end of that 3.5 years, before the gospel went out beyond the circle of Israel.
Yeah, in fact, God had to give Peter a great vision. You can go and tell the Gentiles, which he started doing, and then he backpedaled until the Apostle Paul says, Peter, you idiot, go, the Gentiles are good to go, don't force them to become Jews. They can become Christians, stop trying to get them circumcised. They don't like it, and so, it's a spiritual thing, So essentially we're saying that a lot of those numbers, in fact, in throughout all Hebrew scripture, isn't it, in the Old Testament, I mean, you're a Hebrew expert. You read Hebrew, numbers are figurative. So many numbers. Like, I'll throw one at you. Because he knows all about the numbers, right? So, what about the number 1,000? Like, a day is like 1,000 years. Is that literal? And what about, are we in the millennium? Is there 1,000-year period? Is that literal?
Okay. The only time 1,000 years is mentioned in relation to a millennium is in the book of Revelation, which is the most figurative book that there is. We have to understand that.
Yeah.
And so we take this number that's in the most figurative book. Now let's think about this number, 1,000. It is the most figurative number that there is for a Jew. Let me ask you a question. If God says, all the silver and the gold is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills, who owns the cattle on hill 1001?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that's not what he was saying. He was saying, all the cattle are mine.
Yeah,
right?
everything. Yeah.
On 1,000 hills means everywhere. It's infinite. Yeah. And so we take this figurative book, we get this number that is the most figurative number to the Jew, and that's who Revelation was written to, and we want to take it literally.
Well, we Westerners, we do like to take things literally, don't we?
But we can't take that number literally in the context in which it's
like when you think about it, the same book in the same chapters says, there will be a dragon. Is that a literal dragon or a figurative dragon? Well, it's a figurative dragon. The devil used to be an angel. He's not an actual dragon. And he's going to be bound with chains. Hang on a minute. Are they figurative chains or literal chains? Yeah, they're probably figurative. And he's going to be thrown in an abyss. Is that a literal abyss, like deep ocean, bottom of the Pacific? Or is it
going to hold the devil?
Yeah, or is that a figure? Yeah, so it is figurative. In fact, it's great study on the book of Revelation. You realize that these are 7 visions that Jesus gave to John, and he wrote them down. They're visions. And a lot of it he actually interprets for you. I wouldn't recommend reading the book of Revelation without a really good commentary. That one that I love is by Jonathan Welton. It's called The Art of Revelation. It's a fantastic commentary on the book of Revelation. But so you're saying that this millennium that people make a big deal, maybe that's not so much literal. It's figurative.
It's really something that. The idea of a literal physical millennium is something that has only been in the church for a few hundred years.
Not even, really, yeah.
No, it's a couple of hundred. 200
years, yeah.
That's really been it. Prior to that, the church did not have that concept. And the majority of Bible scholars today still don't have that concept. No. And some of the people that we hold up really highly, like F.F. Bruce, for example, we look at some of these guys and they don't take that number figuratively.
No,
literally, they take it figuratively.
Yeah. Yeah, so what we're saying then is that the end times began in 70 AD with the destruction of Jerusalem, because that was the end of that age and the beginning of the new age, right? Don't take that the wrong way. Yeah. The new age with crystals and things. No, we're not into that. So there's that. Then there's the tribulation, and something that concerns, I know, both of us, is that a lot of people live in fear because they read these verses out of context and they think, oh, the Antichrist is coming to get me. And incidentally, is there such a thing as the Antichrist?
Antichrist, we've got to remember the word anti in Latin, A-N-T-I, means against, but the New Testament was written in Greek, not Latin.
Right.
Anti in Greek does not mean against, it means to substitute.
Yeah.
And so a substitute Christ.
Yeah.
And there have been many substitute Christs that have come down through the ages. And John was writing about it.
Yeah, that 1 John chapter 2.
That there are many antichrists already being loose, people who set themselves up in that position. My comment is, I think people need to be looking for the real Christ rather than for the substitute anyway. So instead of worrying about the Antichrist, let's focus on the real Christ.
But is it true, you also are very familiar with the Greek, is it true that the article the word the, is not...
It's not there.
It's not there. So it actually reads, Antichrist is coming, not the Antichrist. The makes it sound like a guy, right? Or a woman, somebody who is against Jesus in the Latin. We're realizing, no, it's a spirit that is substituting for Christ.
That's correct.
It's similar, and that's more dangerous. If it's just some drug-taking, murderous, horrible person, no one's going to fall for that person. It's somebody that's substitute for Jesus.
We're going to run out of time, but before we do, I wonder if I can say one other thing about this. Tied up with all of this is the other big question, the mark of the beast.
Ooh.
Now, without going into all of the arguments about
666.
Let's just say one thing very simply. This book of Revelation was written to Jews. They understood when God revealed to John that the mark of the beast would be on the forehead and the back of the hand. The Jews immediately understood that, because that was when the law was given. It was to be on the forehead and the back of the hand. It was to be bound to the forehead and the back of the hand.
Perhaps some of you have heard of phylacteries.
Some Jews today literally physically bind phylacteries on there, which is not what God meant.
No.
And people who were looking at that would have immediately understood it had the same meaning in Revelation as it did when the law was given. And that is the front of the head where your decisions are made, The hand is the actions that you take. So the mark of allegiance is our thinking and our actions. If we make allegiance to a false God, to a false Christ, if we work for a false Christ, that is the problem. It's not some physical mark, it's not a tattoo, it's not a chip.
Because the devil's always tried to be, masquerade as Christ. He always tries to take Christ's position or God's position. That's what got him kicked out in the first place. He wanted to be like God. It was the first temptation that he gave to Adam and Eve. You want to be like God. He was projecting. He wants to be like God.
I had somebody just recently saying to me that it is now this little chip that they're going to put in, and that the devil, the chip wasn't supposed to come till after the rapture, but the devil's bringing it in earlier to try and catch a few Christians. And if you get it, you're doomed. And so I said to this person, does that mean that if you refuse the chip and you catch COVID-19, you're in hospital, in a coma, they whack one into you, you recover, you're now going to hell? And they said,
of course not.
So I said, well, it can't be the chip. And my salvation and your salvation cannot be determined by some person putting in some physical thing into our physical body.
Now, he's referring, as you mentioned, he's referring to an allegiance to a false Christ, the spirit of Antichrist, the false Christ. That's what John was referring to, allegiance to them. So essentially what we're saying is, don't be afraid. Of the increase of his government, of Jesus' government, there will be no end. The glory of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. We're not going to be attacked by marauding bad guys. The Church of Jesus Christ is growing bigger and bigger, and I'm not talking about the Mormons. I'm talking about us, and so it's going to continue to grow and continue to fill the earth with love and grace, and we get to be a part of that. So we might finish it up there. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments section here on the YouTube clip. But we hope you've enjoyed this, and we're happy to continue answering any of your questions with any light that we can find in the scriptures for you. God bless you, and have a great weekend. See ya.